The research station floated in high orbit over Earth, an unassuming structure of silver plates and reinforced glass, its purpose hidden from the inhabitants below. It belonged to the Vorx Collective, a species known across the galactic community for their meticulous scientific methods and stringent risk assessments. No species had ever been classified as too dangerous. Before, not the predators of Zagvern 6, not the hyper-intelligent swarms of Drenbul, not even the war-hardened Plithans, who had shattered moons in their conflicts. Yet, preliminary scans of humanity had triggered red alerts across their analytical matrix. Chief Biologist Henneris stood in the observation chamber, his pale blue eyes scanning the transparent containment room where the 3 human test subjects sat. They had volunteered for this perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps for the generous compensation the collective had offered. Henneris did not understand them yet, but he would. That was his job. Commencing primary assessment, Henneris announced, his segmented fingers tapping the console before him. His assistant, Vault, adjusted the observation sensors. The humans designated Samuel Carter, Elena Vasquez, and Daniel Ng were seated comfortably. A few of them had even requested snacks, which had confused the research team, but had been granted nonetheless. "We will begin with baseline tests," Henneris said through the translation interface. "Please state your species name for our records." "Humans," Carter answered, stretching his arms as though he had just woken up. "Homo sapiens if you want to be fancy about it." Henneris noted the response, then moved on. "Basic metabolic analysis will follow. Please remain still." The containment chamber filled with soft pulses of scanning light. Vorx medical technology could map every cell, track the flow of blood, measure neural activity in real time. The initial readings scrolled across the display, and Henneris frowned. "Is something wrong?" Vault asked. Henneris recalibrated the sensors. The results remained the same. He gestured for a deeper scan. Their cellular regeneration is abnormal. They recover from tissue damage at a rate significantly beyond standard biological expectations. "That's a good thing," right? Ng said, munching on a protein bar. "Faster healing and all that?" Henneris hesitated. "That is not the concern. It is the method. The level of adaptability here is excessive." He pulled up a comparative model. Most species healed within a range defined by their evolutionary lineage. Their DNA sequences remained relatively stable. But humans. "Look at this," Henneris murmured, zooming in on a section of the genetic structure. "Their bodies actively adjust to environmental conditions at a speed that should not be possible. Their immune response mutates in real time." "That's what vaccines are for," Vasquez said, leaning forward. "You expose us to something, and our bodies figure it out." "Exposure-based adaptation is normal," Vault countered. "But your genome rewrites itself even without external engineering. That level of self-modification is dangerous." Carter raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous to who?" Henneris did not answer. He was already issuing the next phase of tests. Their muscle efficiency was an outlier far beyond the expected output for a bipedal species of their mass. Their neural activity fluctuated in a pattern that suggested subconscious recalibration to new stimuli. Even their pain threshold was inconsistent. During a brief reflex test, Carter barely reacted to what should have been a sharp stimulus, then moments later winced at a minor pressure application. "They override pain perception at will," Vault said, horrified. "That is not normal. No species does that." Ng grinned. "We call it mind over matter." The data was overwhelming. Humans were not just adaptive, they were excessive in every biological metric. They endured extreme conditions, healed wounds at rates verging on unnatural, and altered their physiology in response to threats without the need for engineered intervention. Henneris turned to his assistant. "Initiate endurance testing." The chamber's temperature dropped. The cold set in fast, the atmosphere mimicking the harshness of an exposed tundra. Vasquez shivered but adjusted her posture, conserving warmth. Ng exhaled sharply, his breath visible in the frigid air. Carter tucked his arms into his jacket and sighed. "This reminds me of winter training," Carter said. "You ever been to Minnesota in January?" The cold intensified. Most species exposed to this level would exhibit signs of systemic distress. Humans, however. "They're adjusting," Vault whispered. Their core temperatures are compensating, their blood flow is redistributing. Carter rubbed his hands together. You guys got any hot cocoa in this place? Henneris ended the test. The temperature reset to normal. All three humans flexed their fingers and stretched as if nothing had happened. Let's try heat resistance, Henneris suggested. A minute later, the temperature rose. Fast. The air thickened with simulated desert heat. Carter and Vasquez began to sweat. NG removed his jacket and wiped his brow. Their hydration levels fluctuated, but they remained functional. How Vault murmured, "Are they adapting so quickly?" Carter smirked. "You should see us in a sauna." Henneris halted the environmental trials. It was clear that these subjects were not just resilient, they were unnatural. But we need to run controlled injury response simulations, Vault suggested. Carter raised a hand. Define injury. Minor, of course, Henneris said. A small cut, perhaps, to monitor tissue response. NG shrugged. Fine by me. A sterile mechanical arm extended into the chamber, a precise scalpel at the end. It made a shallow incision across NG's forearm. He barely flinched. Within seconds, the wound began closing. By the time a minute had passed, only faint redness remained. Henneris felt a rare chill of unease. That level of repair speed should not be possible. Neat trick, Vasquez said. You should see what happens when we break bones. Henneris turned to his team. Send an urgent memo to the Risk Assessment Division. I want a full-scale threat analysis before we proceed with further testing. Vault hesitated. Are we really calling them a threat already? Henneris stared through the glass at the humans, who were now discussing Earth foods with casual indifference. He thought of their regenerative capabilities, their adaptive nature, their ability to override pain, fear, and environmental extremes with sheer willpower. They are more than a threat, he said. They are a biological anomaly. And anomalies are dangerous. Carter popped the last bite of his protein bar into his mouth and grinned. So what's next? Henneris had no answer. Henneris barely slept. He spent the night poring over the human data, rerunning simulations, cross-referencing biological outliers from every known species cataloged in the galactic archives. None of them exhibited the same erratic, hyperadaptive traits that humanity did. He watched the footage from earlier that day. Carter, Vasquez, and NG, all casually enduring what should have been biologically taxing situations. The incision on NG's arm gone. The rapid heat and cold adaptation. The bizarre pain tolerance. It made no sense. Evolution was supposed to have limits, checks and balances. Humans had none. At exactly 0600 station time, Vault entered the research wing, his face set in a grim expression. Risk assessment report just came in. Henneris turned. And? Class 4 biohazard, Vault said, placing a data tablet on the console. They're assigning an emergency review. Henneris stiffened. Class 4 was reserved for species with extreme biological instability, virulent pathogens, organisms that self-destructed violently, creatures with unpredictable genetic mutations. No sentient species had ever been given that classification. They're considering termination of the study, Vault continued. Containment protocols might not be enough. Henneris exhaled sharply, staring through the observation glass at the containment chamber. The humans were awake, stretching, chatting amongst themselves. They looked harmless. They acted harmless. But the data said otherwise. We continue testing until a final decision is made, Henneris said. Vault hesitated. You think that's wise? Wise or not, we need answers. They entered the observation lab together. The humans turned their heads as the overhead speakers activated. Good morning, Henneris said. His voice filtered through the intercom. Morning, Carter replied, yawning. What's on the agenda today? More endurance tests? Extreme gravity? Oxygen deprivation? Actually, Henneris said, ignoring the unsettling way Carter listed those off so casually, we are moving to neurological analysis. We will be conducting cognitive and reflexive response tests. NG cracked his knuckles. Sounds fun. Henneris doubted it would be. The first test was a standard cognitive challenge. The humans were given complex puzzles designed to measure problem-solving skills, pattern recognition, and memory retention. Within minutes, they had adapted to the logic of the puzzles. Vasquez even started solving them faster the longer the test went on, as if her brain was reconfiguring itself mid-task. "This is easy," she said, finishing a simulated language decryption in half the expected time. "You guys got anything harder?" Henneris adjusted the difficulty. The humans barely slowed down. "This isn't normal," Vault muttered. "Even the most intelligent species take time to adjust to increasing complexity. Their problem-solving speed should plateau." It didn't. The next test measured reflexive responses. The humans were subjected to randomized stimuli, visual patterns, sound bursts, sudden changes in environment. Their reaction times were absurd. Carter caught a falling object before it even hit the ground. Ng dodged a simulated projectile as if he had seen it coming before it was even fired. Vault's fingers twitched over the control panel. Are they predicting outcomes in real time? "It's more than that," Henneris murmured. "Their neural pathways are accelerating. They aren't just reacting faster, they are learning faster." The final portion of the neurological test involved a simulated combat scenario. The humans were placed in a virtual environment with harmless holographic opponents, basic attackers, meant to measure movement efficiency and strategic adaptability. Ng was the first to move. His instincts kicked in immediately, evading the first attack without hesitation. Vasquez followed, using the terrain to gain an advantage. Carter, despite his relaxed demeanor, was disturbingly effective. He analyzed movement patterns, adjusted his stance mid-motion, and within moments had neutralized his opponents. Henneris watched in silent alarm. This is not a controlled learning rate. This is exponential. Carter wiped imaginary dust from his sleeve. "So did we pass?" Henneris ended the test. He needed time to process. The humans were given a break while Henneris and Vault reviewed the results. "They don't just adapt," Vault said, scrolling through the data. "They optimize. Every challenge we've presented, they've adjusted to it faster than expected," Henneris agreed. "Their bodies, their minds, there's no stabilization period. They absorb new conditions instantly." Vault hesitated. "Should we be worried?" Henneris clenched his jaw. The logical answer was yes, but a deeper part of him, the scientist in him, was fascinated. He turned back toward the observation chamber. The humans were chatting again, oblivious to the growing unease in the research team. Carter stretched. "So what's next? You guys trying to make us bench press an alien tank or something?" Henneris sighed. "Next we test metabolic extremes." The humans were put through a series of metabolic strain tests. Their bodies were deprived of key nutrients, exposed to varying atmospheric compositions, and even tested for resistance to toxic substances in controlled doses. What they found defied reason. Humans endured. They withstood low oxygen environments longer than expected. Their bodies adjusted to foreign protein structures without severe allergic reactions. Their metabolism compensated for energy deficits in a way that was almost predatory, burning stored resources with perfect efficiency. Ng, after hours of testing, was still cracking jokes. "I don't know what you guys were expecting, but we kind of thrive on adversity." Henneris exchanged a look with Vault. "That is the problem," he said under his breath. At the end of the day, Henneris was summoned to a high-priority conference with the Vorx Advisory Board. He stood before the projected image of Director Zina, a high-ranking member of the Risk Division. "The latest results?" she asked. Henneris sent over the compiled data. There was a long silence as Zina reviewed it. Then she looked up, her expression unreadable. "Your recommendation?" Henneris hesitated. "They are not actively hostile, but their biological nature is concerning." "Concerning," Zina repeated. "They heal unnaturally fast. They withstand extreme conditions with ease. Their brains optimize faster than any species we have ever studied. This is not just concerning, Henneris. This is catastrophic." Henneris remained silent. He could not argue against the facts. Zina leaned forward. "If they were to be exposed to certain military advancements, If they adapted to higher levels of combat training, they could become uncontrollable. A species that evolves in real time, one that thrives under stress, if weaponized, they would be unstoppable. A cold weight settled in Henner's stomach. You are authorized to proceed with containment protocols Zina ordered. We will make a final determination within the next cycle. If the risks are too great, we will classify them as a galactic-level hazard. Henner swallowed. And what does that mean? Zina's voice was quiet. It means we would need to consider elimination. The screen went dark. Henner turned back toward the observation chamber. The humans were playing some sort of hand-slapping game, laughing at each other's reactions. They had no idea what was being discussed behind closed doors. For the first time in his long career, Henner was afraid. Humans weren't just adaptable. They were impossible. The station's emergency protocols activated at exactly 0700 hours. A dull red light pulsed along the walls, and an automated voice echoed through the corridors. Containment breach detected. Biological integrity compromised. Initiating Level 2 isolation procedures. Henner sprinted toward the observation deck, his mind racing. A breach. Impossible. The containment systems were designed to withstand everything from chemical leaks to biohazard outbreaks. The humans were still in their chamber, weren't they? Vault was already there when he arrived, his expression stricken. "It's not what you think," he said quickly. "The humans didn't escape." But he pointed at the data screen, struggling to find the words. Henner followed his gaze. The containment chamber still held all three humans. Carter was doing push-ups. NG was sitting cross-legged, tossing a small ration pack in the air and catching it absent-mindedly. Vasquez was humming, completely unfazed. The system flagged them as a breach. Henner asked, confused. "Not them," Vault swallowed. "Their microbiome." Henner turned sharply. "Explain." Vault pulled up the magnified bioscans. "Their bodies are covered in microorganisms, thousands of species, all living symbiotically. We assumed they were harmless passengers, like most species have. But," he zoomed in further, "some of these organisms show adaptive behavior independent of their host. They mutate alongside the human immune system. They are evolving in real time." Henner felt an unfamiliar sensation creep into his chest. That shouldn't be possible. "It's worse," Vault said. "Some of these microbes entered the station's filtration system through normal air exchange. The station's sterilization protocols neutralized most of them, but a few survived, and they adapted to our sterilization methods." Henner stared at him. "You're saying that their microbiome is evolving against our containment measures?" Vault nodded grimly. "We ran a test. Standard decontamination cycles kill 99.9% of known pathogens instantly. These," he gestured to the display. "They came back resistant within 3 hours. The next cycle took out most of them again, but a handful survived, and adapted again." Henner felt something he had not felt in decades. Fear. "This is not just about the humans anymore," Vault continued. "It's what comes with them. They don't just survive environments, they change them. Their bodies are factories for biological mutation." Henner turned his gaze back to the containment chamber. The humans were laughing about something, completely unaware of the quiet catastrophe they had just triggered. "We have to isolate them further," he said, his voice tight. "If their microbiome can adjust to sterilization, there's no telling what prolonged exposure to our station could do." Vault hesitated. "There's more." Henner exhaled sharply. "Go on." "The humans. They heal fast. We know that. But their microbiome helps them heal faster. Some of these bacteria actively aid tissue regeneration. Others attack foreign pathogens so aggressively that it's like having an entire auxiliary immune system." Henner clenched his jaw. "They carry an evolving biological arsenal inside their own bodies." Vault nodded. "And they don't even know it." Henner turned to the containment chamber one last time. "We have to make a decision. Now." Vault met his gaze. "What do we do?" Henner's fingers hovered over the station's security console. Quarantine was no longer enough. These creatures, these humans, had to be classified correctly. Not just as a risk. as a threat. The emergency risk assessment came back within the hour. The humans were officially designated a Class 5 biological hazard. No species in recorded history had ever received that classification. Even the most aggressive, warlike empires were only labeled as Class 4 extreme threat. But this wasn't about aggression. It was about uncontrollable adaptability. Henneris stood outside the containment chamber, watching the humans through the reinforced glass. They had no idea what had just happened. No idea that the station's highest governing body had convened to decide what to do about them. No idea that their very presence had triggered extermination protocols. "They can't leave," Vault whispered beside him. "If they return to their homeworld, we lose all control over this situation." Henneris nodded slowly. "We need to act before the next shift change. Before anyone questions the lockdown." Inside the chamber, Carter yawned and stretched. "So, any updates? You guys figure out how weird we are yet?" Henneris stepped forward, activating the intercom. "The results are concerning," he admitted. NG smirked. "That bad, huh?" "You don't understand," Vault said. "Your bodies are," he hesitated, then just said it. "You shouldn't exist. No species should be able to do what you do." Vasquez raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's dramatic." Carter chuckled. "Come on, we're not that bad. Yeah, we heal fast, we can handle heat and cold, and we've got some funky bacteria. But that just makes us tough. We're not monsters." Henneris clenched his jaw. "They don't get it. Your very presence is a contamination risk to our station. Your microbiome alone has already adapted to our sterilization systems. Given time, your biology will overwhelm anything we throw at it." Vasquez crossed her arms. "So what, you're afraid we'll survive too hard?" "Yes," Vault said bluntly. "Because that's the problem. You don't just survive. You change the environment around you. You alter ecosystems by existing in them. You infect without meaning to. You adapt too fast. If you set foot on another alien world, it won't stay the same for long. And we have no way of stopping that." The humans fell silent. For the first time, Henneris saw something shift in their expressions. A realization. "You're scared of us," Carter said finally. Henneris met his gaze. "Yes, and we should be." Vasquez exhaled, rubbing her forehead. "Okay, so what happens now?" Henneris hesitated. The station's governing body had already made their decision. They couldn't allow the humans to return to Earth, not because they were hostile, but because they were uncontainable. Before he could respond, the station's alarm blared. "Emergency override detected. Containment failure imminent." Henneris spun around. "What's happening?" Vault checked the console, eyes widening. "The system's failing. Something's overriding the lockdown." They turned back to the chamber just in time to see Carter holding a small device. "Yeah," Carter said. "We kind of figured this might happen." The containment door slid open. NG stepped out first, rolling his shoulders. "You guys are real nice and all, but we're not going to sit around and wait for you to decide whether or not to get rid of us." Vasquez cracked her knuckles. "We're leaving. And before you try to stop us, I'd like to remind you that your fancy security systems, we already adapted to them." Henneris felt a wave of dread. "That's impossible. You didn't have access to." Carter tossed the device toward him. Henneris caught it instinctively. It was a simple scanner, one of theirs. "We borrowed it," Carter said with a grin. "Learned a few things, like how to shut down the lockdown protocols." Vault took a step back. This is exactly what we were afraid of." Carter sighed. "Look, we get it. You're scared of us. But we're not evil. We just don't die easy." Henneris stood frozen as the three humans made their way toward the docking bay. He could have stopped them. He could have sounded the alarm, called the security teams. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't matter. They would adapt. They would survive. And there was nothing the Vornix could do to stop them. As the humans vanished into the docking corridor, Vault turned to Henneris. "What do we tell Command?" Henneris exhaled. "That we made a mistake.